Okay, well, if anybody does have questions as we go along, feel free to unmute yourself or type something in the chat. I am fine being interrupted at any time, so no worries. All right, so let's get started. Oops. Okay, I'm gonna share this. All right. So, and for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Sheila Rabin, and I'm the ORCID US Community Specialist at Lyrasis. So I am your dedicated ORCID support for any questions that you have on this call and off of this call. At any time, I am your go-to person for ORCID questions. So thanks for joining, and let's get started. So our first question. Do researchers need an ORCID ID before your organization does an ORCID API integration? Does anyone want to answer this question?
Okay, no one's spoken up. This is Bonnie. I can answer this, and no, none of your researchers need an ORCID ID before an API integration. As an institution, you need one. At least we do for our integration with Pure, but no. Did you want answers in chat rather than vocal?
Vocal is totally fine, Bonnie. Thank you so much. This is perfect. I love it. You can answer either in chat or you can unmute. It's up to you, whatever you want to do. I love it when people unmute and speak up so that I don't just have to listen to myself talking the whole time. But chat is also fine. But yes, Bonnie, you are correct. Researchers do not need an ORCID ID before your organization does an ORCID API integration. In fact, once your organization has the ORCID API integrated into one or more of the systems that you're using, researchers can actually register for their ORCID ID through that integration right then and there. So your researchers do not need to have ORCID IDs before you do the API integration. So that's one of the many questions that we get a lot. And I mean, it's always great if your researchers do already have ORCID IDs. That's wonderful. But if they don't, once you have an API integration, they can register for their ORCID ID right then and there. So because Bonnie was the first person to answer this question and got it correct, I'm going to add Bonnie to the wheel of names. And anyone else who answers questions from now on can also get on this wheel of names, and we'll spin it at the end to find a winner. Very exciting. Okay, back to our questions. All right, next one. How do I search the ORCID registry? This question has a couple of different answers that could be considered correct. So if you have one or more ideas about how to search the ORCID registry, go ahead and either unmute or type it in the chat. And I'll take the first person that has a correct answer. All right, Christina, we have in the chat, there's a link where you can search by institution name. That is correct. And that is one of the ways, and I'll show you in these next slides, the different ways that you can search the registry. And this special link that Christina's talking about is one of the ways, and I'll share that with everybody. So first, very, very simple way that you can do manually is you can go to the ORCID website. You can go to orcid.org, and I'll just demonstrate this. When you go to orcid.org, you can see that there's actually a search box up in the top right corner where you can search the ORCID registry. So for example, I'll just search for my name. And you can see that the results are coming up with information that matches that search. So that's one way. There's also this advanced search. So once you do a search in this simple search box, you'll see that there's also an option for advanced search. And you can use that advanced search to search by first and last name, institution name, for example, keywords. You can check a box to also search within the other name fields. So there's a section in the ORCID record that's also known as, and it's like other names that somebody has gone by, and you can search by ORCID ID. But this is very like a manual search. This is good for just kind of like one-off searches. The results do not like download to a CSV or anything. This is just going to present within the user interface. So that's one way. Another way is to use the ORCID API. If you're comfortable using the command line, you can do searches of the ORCID registry in the command line. ORCID does have a tutorial online, and most people are searching in ORCID to like find out how many or who at their organization already has an ORCID record. That's where most of the searches are coming from. So this tutorial goes into detail about how to basically use the command line or programming skills to find out who at your organization has an ORCID ID. So you can search by name, by DOI, affiliation. So there's instructions there on how to do that. This is kind of a little more technical. So if you're not a developer or you're not somebody that uses the command line on a regular basis, this might be a little intimidating. Which is one of the reasons why we also have some other options. And I think that the link that Christina is mentioning is the last answer that I have. So we'll get there in just a minute. But I do want to point out also that thanks to one of our colleagues, Clark, at Oklahoma State University, there's also instructions on how to use R to do searches in ORCID. So if you are familiar with R and you like to use R, we've got instructions on how to do that from Clark. I'll just show you what that looks like. It's a really great tutorial that walks you through step by step on how to do different types of searches using R. So that's another option that's out there for you. And all of these links and things I will be sharing afterwards with the notes and stuff. And then here's the link that Christina was talking about, and I'll actually just paste this into the chat so that you have it on hand. But basically, there's a tool that our colleagues in the UK created that will allow you to basically plug in the information of your organization. You can include your organization's Ringgold ID, your grid ID, your email domain, and just the name of your organization. And if you paste this URL into your browser, it'll bring up all the results from ORCID that match these search terms. And in order for people's ORCID IDs to come up in the search results, they need to have information that matches your search terms publicly available in their ORCID record. So searching in ORCID just is more to kind of give you an idea. It will never be a 100% accurate idea of like who has an ORCID ID, because some people might have an ORCID ID, but if they don't have any of this identifying information publicly available in their ORCID record, then they won't come up in the search results. So let me just copy this link for you and I'll paste it into the chat so that you can just have this, because it's fun to experiment with. And if you need help finding your organization's Ringgold ID or Grid ID, for example, just contact me and I can help you set up this search for your organization, if that would be helpful. Okay, so Christina got that. So I'm going to add Christina to the wheel of names. Are there any questions about this? This is kind of it can be a little complex. So I want to make sure, see if people have questions on how to do searching in ORCID. And if you have any use cases where you really want to do like some specific searching, but you feel overwhelmed by using the API, just contact me and I will help you figure out, you know, how to do the search, and we can work on it together. So there are a couple different ways to search, and hopefully that gives you a good idea of some of the options. Okay, here's our next question. This one is a little specific, so I'm not sure if anybody's going to know the answer, but one of the questions that I do get frequently is, where can I find either some code samples or sample XML or JSON to do some testing with the ORCID API? Does anybody know or have ideas about where these samples could be found? Great, Elizabeth, GitHub. Yes, you are correct. That's a great guess, and you are right. So excellent. GitHub, definitely. That's where there's actually a lot of information about the ORCID API on GitHub, but specifically there are samples in XML and JSON for all of the different types of data that can be added to an ORCID record, or, you know, read from an ORCID record. And so those are on GitHub. And then ORCID also has several different organizations' examples of their code just on their website. So I'll click on that first, and then we'll look at the GitHub. So here's the code examples, and you'll see that there are a lot of things listed, and they've got links to their code on GitHub, so you can see all of the different examples. So lots of code samples available for people to look at. And then when it comes to the XML and JSON samples, this, you know, you may want to bookmark ORCID's GitHub page. This specific link, it has the schema for each of the sections of the ORCID record. It has all of the endpoints listed. So these are all the different types of data that can be read or written to the ORCID record. Some tutorials for you. Just more information. So this is a really helpful link. And then down at the bottom, you'll see sample files, and you'll see that they've got XML. They have some JSON. If you are wanting to work with JSON and you can't find a sample here, let me know, because I do have some samples from other organizations that are using JSON. But this will give you an idea of what the XML and or JSON would need to look like for each of the different parts of the ORCID record. So like the funding section, the works section down here at the bottom. So there's your samples. And of course, as always, if you need anything more specific or can't find what you're looking for on these pages, just contact me. Okay, so great job, Elizabeth. I'm going to add you to the wheel of names. All right. All right, so back to our questions. Okay, so now, so the questions we've covered so far are just ones that I've heard over the course of the years. But the questions we're about to address are questions that were actually submitted by maybe one of you. Anybody who registered for this call had an opportunity to pose a question. So the first one from the community is, under what circumstances might ORCID records be deleted from an API connected system? So just to give a little context around this, when your organization has the ORCID API integrated into one or more of your systems, your researchers will be connecting their ORCID ID with that integration through the OAuth process. So you'll basically be collecting authenticated ORCID IDs through that integration. And so this question is really asking, once you've collected all of these ORCID IDs, are there any circumstances where you might need or want to delete ORCID IDs from your integration? Does anybody want to try to answer?
Well, this is Bonnie again, and I can answer at least something interesting that happened to us recently. We sent some ORCID records from our Pure instance over to ORCID, and then we made some changes in our system. And so then, of course, those changes were reflected over in ORCID, and the records disappeared, and people were all confused, and it was because of the work we had done. Also, when we have researchers that we're collecting their records from ORCID from leave our institution, then we turn off that integration, and so we lose those connections going forward from that point.
Yeah, that's a great point, Bonnie. And that's basically what I was going to say, just in terms of, it's kind of up to your organization and or the individuals that are connecting their ORCID ID with your ORCID API integration. So once somebody does connect their ORCID ID with an ORCID API integration, by default, that connection is established to last for 20 years. Some organizations are really interested in that because they're interested in continuing to keep up with those researchers even after the person may have left your organization. So in some cases, the organization wants to keep that connection even after the person has left. But if your organization is not necessarily interested in keeping up with those researchers, you may choose to remove those ORCID records from your integration after people have left your organization. And that's completely fine. And that is kind of a decision that is up to you. Another use case around this would be if for whatever reason, an individual researcher no longer wants to have their ORCID ID connected with your organization, they can ask to have that removed. Lots of integrations allow the user to revoke the connection themselves, and individual users can always go into their ORCID record and revoke connections that they've already made through their ORCID record. So it's really just up to your organization. If you want to remove the ORCID records from people that are no longer there, that's totally fine, and that's totally up to you. Or if the individual, for whatever reason, wants to be removed from your integration, we should honor that with respect to those individuals. And I'll just show you really quickly. I have a lot of tabs open, but so when somebody's logged into their ORCID record, like I am here, up on this tab, this drop down, there's an account settings. So if I go to my account settings for my ORCID record, and hopefully it loads. Okay, there we go. You'll see that there's this trusted organization section. And these are all of the organizations that I have connected my ORCID ID with through their API integration. So as an individual, I can see all of the connections that I've made, and I can choose at any time to revoke any of these connections just by clicking that trash can. So really the idea behind ORCID is that the researcher has full control over their own ORCID record and who has access to their data and the visibility of their data. So users can always revoke these connections that they've made. And then also on the organizational side, you can always remove ORCID IDs from your integration if, for really whatever reason that makes sense to you. But just know that the default, once I've made this connection by default, that'll stay for 20 years unless I revoke it or the organization revokes it. So Bonnie, thank you for answering that. You're getting another entry on the Wheel of Names. Any questions around anything that we've covered so far? Okay. If you do think of questions, again, don't hesitate to either pipe up or chat them. All right, next question. This came in from somebody from the registration form, and the question is there an ORCID API that can pull data from an Access database? I'm not sure if anybody wants to try to answer that. I'll give you a minute if anybody does want to take a stab. Going once, going twice. Okay, I'll go ahead and answer because I think this is actually a little bit of a trick question. So there's really only one ORCID API. There's a public version, and then there's a version for member organizations. And the ORCID API is basically some code infrastructure that can technically be integrated with any type of system or database. So basically, it would just be a matter of doing some development work to set the API code up. If you do have an Access database that has a bunch of information about your researchers and you want to take that information from your Access database and have it written to your researchers' ORCID records, that is certainly possible. Basically what you would need to do, there are a few steps that you would need to take though to get that set up. So basically you would need to set up some sort of user-facing web page where your researchers could go to connect their ORCID ID with your integration that you're setting up. And then basically you would need a mechanism by which to take the information from your Access database and get it into either XML or JSON format so that any researchers that do connect their ORCID ID with your integration, you can write that information to their ORCID record. That's kind of a big overview. There are actually a lot more details involved if you're actually planning to do something like this. So if you are the person who asked this question, or if you have information about your researchers in some sort of database and you want to be able to write that data to your researchers' ORCID records, just contact me and we can go through all of the specifics together. But yes, the general answer to this question is the ORCID API can certainly be set up to pull data from an Access database, but there's just some technical and development work that would need to happen to make that to make it flow smoothly. Okay, next question. Ooh, okay. What are the ORCID API connections to ERA Commons? Does anybody know or want to take a guess? Going once, going twice. Oh, Christina. Okay, is that something with my NCBI? Yes, it is. It's connected. It's all like has to do with NIH grants and grant management for NIH grants. So that's a really good guess. My NCBI does fit into this. So I'll take that as a good try, a good guess. I will add your name to the wheel. So basically, we have a few pieces of information for you. As I was looking into this, just this thing, there is a help page about ORCID and ERA Commons that was actually just updated today. So I'll share this link with you in the chat. But basically, researchers can link their ORCID ID to ERA Commons. But as far as I know, that is really it in terms of the ORCID API and ERA Commons. So they can link the ORCID ID, but there's no transfer of data to and from ERA Commons and the ORCID record. So there's a lot more that could be implemented here to make life easier for researchers. Now with Science CV, that is where the current ORCID API integration is really the most robust and useful to researchers. And when people go to do their Science CV, which is like the biosketch portion of the grant application for NIH, and also NSF is using it now too. When people go to do their Science CV, they have the opportunity to connect their ORCID ID to Science CV, and that basically designates NCBI as a trusted organization on their ORCID record. So it's kind of all connected in there. ERA Commons specifically, an individual can take steps to link their ORCID ID to their ERA Commons, but as of right now, to my current understanding, there's no transfer of data from ORCID to ERA Commons or from ERA Commons to ORCID. But if you're using Science CV, they do have that transfer of data. So with Science CV, if somebody is going to fill out their biosketch and they have all of their information populated in their ORCID record, they can basically just click a button and it will transfer, for example, all of their publications from their ORCID record will get transferred automatically into their Science CV. That way they don't have to sit there and retype everything into Science CV. They can just have it in ORCID and import it in. And so I have some links here about that process as well, which as of right now, I mean, I would encourage researchers to, link their ORCID ID to ERA Commons, even though that transfer of data isn't there yet. I'm told that NIH will be starting to add information to ORCID records, funding information. So anyone who gets a grant from NIH will get that information written to their ORCID record for them. So go ahead and make that connection, but especially want to draw attention to the Science CV integration. And if any of the researchers that you're working with are applying for NIH or NSF funding, that Science CV integration will save them a lot of time if they have their ORCID records set up with all their information in there. And don't worry, I'm going to share these slides and put this stuff in the notes after too, so you'll have access to all of these links. But there's a lot of information online from NIH about ORCID and what NIH is doing with ORCID. Any other thoughts or questions around this while I add Christina to the wheel again? And just, I think related to this, yeah, NIH is just asking people to link their ORCID ID to ERA Commons, and they have instructions for how to do that. Certain types of grants, so the research training, career development, and other research education awards are actually requiring ORCID IDs right now. So it kind of depends on what type of grant you're getting. But yeah, all sorts of information about that, and I'll share these links after. I see a question from Laura. Is there a timeline for integration for ERA Commons? That's a really great question, and it's ever elusive. I think things tend to move pretty slowly with NIH stuff. So I've asked for timelines, but I think they're hesitant to give any specific timelines. I have been told that for NIH adding funding information to grantees' ORCID records, that they're planning or hoping to have that up and running like in January, but of course we'll just all have to wait and see. But they are, increasingly planning to do more, integrations with ORCID. I just don't know how long it's going to take. But if I ever do hear any updates, I will be sure to let you all know. I do know that a lot of people are really interested in having kind of an integration. There's like a My Bibliography section where people have already been listing their works in ERA Commons, I think, for a long time. And they would love to be able to have that integrated so they could just send those works directly to their ORCID record and populate their ORCID record. And I think, you know, NIH is aware of that, but again, I haven't heard any timelines for having that up and running. Okay. Okay, here's another question for you all. Does the ORCID API integrate in any way with the Crossref API? Anyone want to take an answer, take a guess? Christina, Crossref metadata search. That's correct. Do you want to expand a little more? So the basic answer is yes, there is an integration there. Yeah, using the search and link wizard. Great job. Thanks, Christina. So Christina is right. And I'll go to my ORCID record and I'll show you how this works. But basically, again, Crossref does have some information online about their integration with ORCID. So I can just put this into the chat for you for reference. But within the ORCID record, and I'll go to mine and actually just show you this, there's basically a Crossref search and link wizard in the works section of the ORCID record. And if you don't have an ORCID record, I would say go ahead and get one, even if you don't think that you're a researcher or don't need one. If you're working with researchers using ORCID, it's sometimes helpful to have your own ORCID record in your own account, just so you can poke around and see how things work in here. So I'm logged into mine. And if I scroll down to the works section, as you see here, if I click on this, hover on this add works, there is this search and link option. So this is really for individual researchers that want to kind of quickly and easily add their publications to their ORCID record. So if we click on search and link, a whole list of different databases will appear. You could click on any one of these. If we have works in any one of these databases, we can search for our works and have them added to our ORCID record without having to sit there and type everything in. So you'll see they're listed alphabetically, and Crossref metadata search is one of the options. And I'm just going to go ahead and click on that. And typically, I've already done this, so you're not seeing it, but typically, that looks interesting. I think they might have changed it. Basically, the first step, if you're doing this for the first time, a screen will pop up asking the user to authorize Crossref as a trusted organization on their ORCID record. So that's basically the user connecting their ORCID ID to Crossref. This screen looks very different from what I typically see when I go here. But what it'll do is it will search for that person's name. There we go. That's more like it. This is typically what I see. I guess they just added that intermediate screen. So it will automatically search for the person's name. The only thing to note about the Crossref search function is that it won't let you specify that you want to look for the first and last name together. It will just give you like all of the results for the first name and the last name like separately. So in most cases, you'll have to limit the search, using one of these limiters over here on the side, either by the year, the type of publication, the name of the publication, the publisher. So just keep that in mind. But ultimately, when the results are appearing here, if one of these to me, I can click add to ORCID, and actually I can just do it and then remove it later. But if I click this add to ORCID, it will just automatically send that to ORCID. One other thing to note about Crossref is that once a person does this connection with Crossref once, and then from then on, if they're publishing in journals and when they submit their publications to the publisher, if they include their ORCID ID when they submit their publication, Crossref will basically try to automatically add those future publications to the ORCID record for them, so the person doesn't have to go back into this search function over and over again. So Crossref is one of the search and link wizards that does the auto update if future publications come into Crossref that have the person's ORCID ID. DataCite is the other one that also does the auto updating. So Crossref and DataCite are the two main organizations that create DOIs for things, and that's really kind of the best practice. So the more works can have DOIs in ORCID, the better it is for linking people to their work and for identifying duplicate works in the ORCID record. But long story short, Crossref does have an integration with ORCID. It's built into the work section as a search and link wizard. And when you get into the Crossref metadata search, you can just select which items are yours and have them added to your ORCID record by clicking the button. Okay, I'm seeing some questions coming in. Can you use your ORCID records to populate your digital measures account? The short answer for that is yes. So basically, I'm going to hide that real quick. So you'll see that I have all of my works populated here in my ORCID record. And if I was using digital measures, within my digital measures profile, there's an option to import publications, and ORCID is one of the options for importing publications. So with digital measures, right now, users can import any publications that they have in their ORCID record. They can import those directly into digital measures. But digital measures doesn't import any of the other information like education and employment and funding. It really only does publications right now. And the data transfer doesn't work the other way. So you can't send data from digital measures to ORCID, at least not right now. We've been kind of petitioning digital measures to add more functionality and let people import more types of data and also export data from digital measures to ORCID, but they haven't gotten there yet. Right now, you can just import publications from ORCID into digital measures, and that can save some time. And then let's see, another question. For the future publications that will work automatically coming in when something new is published, as long as you have Crossref or DataCite as a trusted organization. That's right. Yeah, so in order to have an ORCID record automatically populated with new publications, the stipulations are that the author will have needed to, yes, connect their ORCID ID with Crossref and or DataCite as a trusted organization, which really just means they need to come into their work section, click on search and link, and then click on Crossref or click on DataCite. I think I've already connected my ORCID ID with both Crossref and DataCite, so it's not really letting me show you what that authorization screen looks like because I've already gone through that process. So for example, but once you do go through that process, then yeah, DataCite or Crossref will be listed as a trusted organization. So you'll see that I have Crossref and DataCite both listed as a trusted organization because I went through that process in the search and link wizards. So that's the first step. The second step is whoever is publishing, the author needs to make sure that they submit their ORCID ID to the publisher so that the ORCID ID can be included in their DOI metadata. And that's how Crossref and DataCite ORCID record to add that publication to. So yes, that is correct. In order to have those future publications added, they just need to connect with Crossref and DataCite in the search and link wizard, and use their ORCID ID when they publish. It's pretty cool, actually, once you start seeing those new publications just automatically getting added to the ORCID record. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't even have to do anything. I just published my paper and it's added to my ORCID record for me. Is that the same for DataCite? So for an IR that uses DataCite, the IR has to have ORCID ID on every record. So DataCite does operate the same way as Crossref in that if there is a, you know, something in your IR where you're minting DataCite DOIs for those items, if the ORCID ID is included in the metadata for those items, they can get automatically added to the ORCID record. But the stipulation is that the ORCID ID needs to be included in your DOI metadata. So if you're using an IR that's using DataCite DOIs, of course, you're not required to have ORCID IDs on every record in your IR, but if you want those items to be automatically added to your researchers' ORCID records, then you do need to be basically collecting your researchers' authenticated IDs so that they can go along with each item in the IR. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Great questions, y'all. Okay, any others? If you have more, just type them in or unmute. Totally fine. Okay, so this is actually our last pre-planned question for the day. And there are actually a lot of potential right answers for this. So the question is, what resources are available to help me understand and or implement the ORCID and ORCID API integration? Does anyone want to give this a guess or have an idea of what resources are available? Tracy, wonderful. It looks like we've got a right answer here. Absolutely, Tracy. I'm going to add you to the wheel of names. And then we'll talk about this. All right, so yeah, ORCID does have a lot of resources about the ORCID API, a lot of documentation. In fact, in my opinion, the documentation that ORCID has about the ORCID API can be a little bit overwhelming, especially if you're just getting started. They do have this getting started page though, which is really good for kind of walking, excuse me. It's good for walking through if you are just getting started and you want to kind of get an idea of what you'll need to know, what you'll need to do. So absolutely. So I encourage you to look at these pages, but also if you have like specific questions or you're having trouble finding documentation for something specific that you're trying to do, just contact me and I will point you in the right direction. I'm pretty familiar with all of the documentation that's out there. And if we need to, escalate questions to ORCID tech support, we can totally do that too. But their documentation around the API is pretty thorough. So yeah, Tracy, you hit the nail on the head. That was the first thing that I was going to point people to is ORCID's API resources online. There's also, like I said, a number of API tutorials that ORCID has in place that kind of walk you through workflows for different types of system integrations. There are also, instructions on how to read data from ORCID records, how to write data to ORCID records. There is a really great tutorial if you're just getting started or even if you're not a developer and you want to just learn more and explore how the API works, there's a Google OAuth Playground tutorial that I really like. I did it when I was first learning about the ORCID API. So I'll put that in the chat too, just so you can look at that. But there's basically a lot of documentation, a lot of tutorials if you want to use the OAuth Playground, here's the link to that. Oops, that was going into the wrong place. Okay, so anyway, the resources are available. Like I've been saying throughout the call, I am your dedicated support person, so don't hesitate to contact me if you need any help, any support, even if you just want to like brainstorm or make sure that you understand correctly what's going on. I am here to support you. Send me an email. We can also schedule a call. I'm here for you in whatever way is most helpful. Also, we have our entire community of organizations that are all ORCID members, and we're all working on these kinds of integrations and things together. So our community discussion forum is a great place to look for information or ask questions. And we also have other resources that I post and announce on there. We have a planning guide just specifically for US organizations thinking about adopting ORCID. So it will kind of walk you through all of the different considerations for getting started with ORCID. And that includes more than just the API integration. As you can see here, there are kind of like 3 main components for getting started, which are making sure that you have your internal stakeholder support, getting that technical integration, but also making sure your researchers know about ORCID and get their ORCID IDs, because they're a really big part of, you know, getting the most value from your integration. So there's kind of an outreach and education component too. And as you're thinking about, you know, doing your own ORCID API integration, you can think about, you know, what you want to do with ORCID. Do you want to read information from ORCID records? Do you want to write information to ORCID records? Do you want to do both? What kind of information are you most interested in? A lot of people are most interested in things like publications and funding, but there are also a lot of other different sections of data on the ORCID record that you could potentially be reading and writing. So just give that some thought. I just have this from Florida State, as Florida State University did a really good job of like getting a bunch of different organizational stakeholders together to strategize about their ORCID integrations and their ORCID outreach all together across the organization. So they're a great kind of success story for working across the organization between stakeholders to adopt ORCID. And this is just an example from Virginia Tech around just making sure that once you have an ORCID integration, making sure that your researchers then know that that integration is available and have an idea of how to use it. So making documentation for your researchers so that they understand and can use your integration. That's another component that is really helpful for getting the most value. And so we have these types of examples from across the community that are also resources for you. Wow, we reached the end of our questions, our FAQs. Are there any remaining ones? Does anybody have any questions they want to just tack on to the end? Well, like I said, if you do have questions that come up, just don't hesitate to contact me. In fact, I'm going to put my email address in here again, just because I would love to hear from you. Or even if you don't have questions and you just want to give me an update about what you're working on, what you're doing with ORCID, I would just love to hear from you all at any point. Wow, I just can't believe that we got done without running out of time. Okay, so that said, let me just get out of here. I will be sharing these slides. I will be fleshing out the notes. So I'll be putting the links and things under each question so that you'll have access to all the links and things that I talked about. So I'll be sharing the notes, the slides. This meeting is being recorded, so I'll share the recording as well. So just stay tuned for that. Hopefully I'll have that to you later today or tomorrow. Aside from that, I think we're gonna be ready to spin the wheel of names. Are y'all ready? Y'all ready to see who the big winner is gonna be for today? All right, here we go. I'm gonna click to spin. Yay! All right, Christina, your answers paid off. You have won the Wheel of Names. So I'll be in touch with you separately to get your prize to you. I do want to thank all of the other participants, just everyone who's on the call. I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned something. I hope you had fun a little bit. Like I said, if more questions come up, just contact me. And thank you to the others who also answered questions. Really appreciate that engagement. And maybe you can win again. We are having another call next week on the 3rd. So on voting day, I know everybody's going to be a little frazzled. So if you want to take an hour out of your day to learn about, we're going to talk about FAQs related to outreach about ORCID and getting researchers to adopt ORCID. So it's going to be less of a technical focus and more of the kind of community outreach focus. So if you want to join us for that, wonderful. Thank you so much. And we have about 5 more minutes. So if you want to stay on and ask anything else, I'll wait. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and a good weekend. And a happy Halloween from my little bats up here. Wonderful. Thank you all. Stay tuned for my email. Oh, thanks, Barry. Thanks, Clayton. Thanks, Christina. Thank you so much.
Hey, Sheila, I did have one quick question.
Yeah.
Do you know of like any off-the-shelf products as far as like getting an organization up and running with, you know, just tracking every piece of research and where it goes, anything like that?
Yeah. So off-the-shelf products. So there are several vendor systems that are classified as current research information systems. So there are several vendor systems that already have the ORCID API built in. You would just need to basically use one of your organization's ORCID API credentials to turn that functionality on if you're using one of the vendor systems. Let's see, I think I actually have like a slide. The top ones, the best ones in terms of ORCID functionality that I would recommend, because they allow for the two-way transfer of data, are Pure, which is an Elsevier product, and Symplectic Elements, which is like, I think, digital science. These two, Pure and Symplectic Elements, allow researchers to import data from their ORCID record into the system. And they also allow to write information from the vendor system to the ORCID record, in particular works and employment affiliations. These other ones that you're seeing here, so Digital Measures and Faculty 180, these also have the ORCID API built in, but right now they both only allow that one-way import from ORCID into the system. They don't allow that two-way of writing to ORCID. Digital Measures is really the most limited right now because it only will import publications from ORCID, whereas Faculty 180 will actually import publications and like education and employment and like more of that data from the ORCID record into Faculty 180. So it really just kind of depends, like if you're on the market for a vendor system to keep track of research information, one of these would be, you know, a good ideas to look at. Or, you know, if you're already using one of these systems, I would encourage you to go ahead and turn that ORCID integration on. Does that answer your question, George?
Yes, yeah, very helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, and if you want more information about any specific systems, just send me an email and I can get you more details. And then I'm seeing a chat from Laura, any info on Esploro? I'm not sure if there's anyone on the call who's part of the like Esploro. I know that they're doing kind of like a beta testing with some organizations. Last I heard, Esploro is, you know, they're going to have an ORCID integration built in, is what I've heard. That I believe will do a two-way transfer of data. Now, in terms of their timeline, that I don't know. Yeah, I would say if you want to get more details, it never hurts to just contact the vendor. And the more we can ask vendors about ORCID stuff, the more they will like listen and actually do things with ORCID, because they want to provide what their customers need. And if their customers are asking for ORCID information, then hopefully the vendors will do that. But yeah, supposedly Esploro will have the ORCID API integrated in. I just don't know what their timeline is. Any other last minute burning questions? All right, well, thank you again, everyone. I actually have to jump off and go to another call right now, but I hope you all have a really great weekend. Stay safe, and I will see you next time.